Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab, all on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good morning, everyone, from our viewers from the United States, and good afternoon to our viewers from Europe and around the world. Welcome to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. My name is Heather Conley. I'm Senior Vice President for Europe, Eurasia, and the Arctic here at the Center. And it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce you to a really timely and topical event looking at foreign influence in democratic processes and institutions. We're so grateful to the Argyros Family Foundation for providing the support to make this program possible. We have three fantastic discussants with us today to really focus on a transatlantic approach to fighting, countering foreign influence, and building greater resilience. Let me briefly introduce them, and then we look forward to jumping into the conversation. First, let me welcome Javier Zarzalejos, who is a member of the European Parliament from the European People's Party. He was elected as a member of Parliament in July of 2019. He now currently serves as the Vice Chair of the Special Committee on Foreign Interference in All Democratic Processes in the European Union. That's a big title, but it's a big job. Javier also is a member of the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, and also serves on the Committee of Legal Affairs. Prior to his service in the European Parliament, we like to claim Javier also as a think tanker, one of our family, because he was appointed the Secretary General of the Foundation for Social Analysis and Studies in January of 2012. And before that, he served as the Secretary General in Prime Minister Aznar's office from 1996 to 2002. So Javier, we are delighted to have you with us. Joining on from the American side is former Congressman Mike Rogers. Congressman Rogers formerly served as the chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, a former FBI agent, a former Army officer. Congressman Rogers was very uniquely placed to be a true thought leader in cybersecurity in this nexus of cyber and foreign interference. Many of you may see Congressman Rogers on CNN, where he serves as a national security commentator. He too has a think tank background as well, serving as a distinguished fellow at the Hudson Institute and teaching and engaging the next generation of cybersecurity experts. And finally, and may I say, it is with the greatest pleasure that I introduce to you our Argyros Visiting Fellow at CSIS, Mira Milosevich. Mira has been with us at CSIS for the past 2 months. It's been a delight, but she's come through us virtually as she has been in Madrid, where she is the Senior Research Fellow for Russia and Eurasia at the Elcano Royal Institute for International Strategic Studies. She also serves as an Associate Professor at IE University. She has been an advisor to NATO, to the Spanish, European, and British parliaments. So, and has been looking at CSIS at how EU-Russian relations are evolving. So Mira will be a co-moderator with me today. So welcome to all of you. I always like to follow our great newsman, Bob Schieffer's role. He says, you know, you have to start with the news. So let's start with the news as we begin our first question. And we have had certainly the first member of the Biden administration, the first cabinet member, has been tasked to do an intelligence assessment of what foreign election interference happened in the US election. So let me begin, Javier, with you. You have this new special committee and a whole host of European elections this year. You're going to keep us busy monitoring and watching all of them. What keeps you up at night? What's the breaking news from the European Union on protecting these important democratic processes? And then I will turn to you, Congressman Rogers, for your thoughts on what keeps you up at night on foreign interference. Javier, over to you.
Thank you, Heather. And first of all, I'd like to say how glad and pleased and honored I feel for having been invited to this conversation along with you, with all members of CSIS, and with Congressman Rogers and such a long and impressive record in public service. I'm particularly honored because your center is the kind of much needed institutions to underpin the importance of working on both sides of the Atlantic and joining forces with regard to the common challenges we are facing. And certainly this one that has brought us together in this discussion is a real challenge. To add this European perspective, I would say that in my opinion there is a cause for a growing concern, and it is the involvement of domestic European actors in the Russian disinformation strategy. That is something that we have seen. That is something that has been detected, and that's why the European Parliament, we have brought together both disinformation and foreign interference in democratic processes within the remit of the special committee. There is a growing evidence of very substantial political funding through a variety of circuits and mechanisms from Russia, basically to far-right parties in Europe, targeting Austria, Germany, and Italy, through the dissemination of the political discourse, and obviously using these parties as a tool of influence in a series of very substantial political debates, such as sanctions on Russia, such as destabilization activities of Russian intelligence services. They share a common anti-European approach, an anti-European narrative, hyper-nationalistic approach, and certainly in these parties, in these political forces, there is a weird but deeply rooted admiration for Putin as a strong man, as an iron fist, as someone very tough on the causes of antisocial problems, individuals, and movements. And that is something that, as I said, is a cause for a growing concern, because Russia has become a main reference to call into question the values and the authenticity of Western democracy. And on the other hand, I think that Russia feels that Europe is in a process of dissolution, that European societies are falling apart. There are several factors on that, and they are amplifying and disseminating the same apocalyptic discourse of the failure of the West, which is very much used by extremists both on right and left. I mean, there is a serious deterioration of the transatlantic relation, which is a real issue that we will have to tackle, and I have high hopes in the new administration. There is a permanent identity crisis in NATO. That is something Russians are very sensitive to. There is the breakup of the European paradigm of prosperity as a result of the latest financial crisis. We have two social processes very important. One is the impact of immigration, and the other is the demographic decline of Europe. And obviously the impact of the COVID pandemics and the recession entail that. So this is the basis for an apocalyptic discourse of collapse of Western democracies, which is very useful for those anti-system forces operating in Europe. And there's been a rise in populism and extremism in Western Europe. And it is very useful for the purpose of Putin to hold on to power, because they say, well, we are better off than they in the West. We will have vaccines with 100% success in immunizing against COVID. Well, I would stop here as the main and first remarks.
Well, thank you so much. And I think you highlight two things that, Congressman Rogers, I'd like to ask you your views on, because Javier described the enemy from within. where foreign influence turns, very organically into the identity of the country you're trying to impact. So I'd love your comment on that. Russia certainly has extraordinary tools, but Russia is not the only state actor that we have seen. In some ways, we see other state actors catching up. And I'd welcome your thoughts on other state actors and what keeps you up at night in this space.
Well, a lot, unfortunately. So one of the things, and thank you, Javier, and thanks to the center. It's been an honor to be here, Mira. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm honored to be on the panel at all. A couple of things keep me up at night, given where we're talking about. The information operations that we saw Russia start out with in the Eastern Bloc and try to, get their sea legs underneath them, pretty effective. And when we saw it go from there, we saw it take on other instances. And what we found that they're doing is taking kernels of truth. In Spain, the Catalan independence movement, it's a kernel of truth. And then they get in and put their their kind of brew of disinformation in the pot to try to stir things up. We saw the same thing in Scotland. We saw the same thing in the 2016 US elections. And unfortunately, there's plenty of people willing to buy into these information operations in a way that's, to me, is very, very concerning. So, it used to be that they would, under the Soviets, they would literally try to get to journalists or co-opt journalists or use leaflets, as they did in the race riots in the United States in the late 60s, to try to foment this kind of hatred and chaos and people at each other's throats. It's so much easier today. They can get at you at your computer, on your smartphone, in a way that we just haven't seen before. And that escalated when they realized how important and how effective it could be through these different disinformation campaigns to sow chaos in these countries. And so that's one of the things that worries me most. It worries me about our European allies, certainly worries me here in the States. Combine that with, and I think the SolarWinds cyber hack that everybody saw in the news, when you very, very sophisticated, very centered on espionage, by the way, this wasn't an attack, it was an espionage event trying to extract information. The kinds of information that they were able to obtain was unbelievable. It's going to be here a while. It's as bad as everyone says it is. And that's a whole nother topic for us to discuss why that is. But when you combine this new sophistication of cyber exfiltration of data and information and the ability to corrupt that information while you're in those networks and systems, meaning the information that you're getting may or may not be accurate, then you go through with this information operation. That keeps me up at night. And as you said, the Chinese are getting better at this. We're seeing the same kind of thing we saw with the Russians in the Eastern Bloc. The Chinese are trying this with diaspora in places like Australia and in around the Pacific Rim. They're using these information operations. Then you saw it bigger with this COVID effort. China is the only one that can solve the problem, and the Chinese government organization structure is the only one that can really solve this problem. That's all designed as an information operation, and we shouldn't be fooled by anything else. And the more countries that don't have carrier groups, if you will, that see the success of this with very little downside, the more you're going to see these countries engage in this activity. So those are the kinds of things. And are we prepared for it? At the last part of that, are we doing a collective defense with our European allies in the United States and people who believe in liberal democracies? Are we really as lashed up, as tight as we need to be moving forward? All of those kinds of things make me get up early in the morning, for sure.
Or make you never sleep at night. Exactly. No, and I do want to come back to that nexus of the network penetration and the disinformation and influence piece. So thank you for noting that. But of course, it's a strategy of exploiting weaknesses. And that's the probing, the constant probing, and the response they get to that probing is really essential. Mira, let me turn to you for the next set of questions to our distinguished panel.
Good morning, first of all. Good morning, America, and good afternoon, Europe. And I'm also very, very happy and honored to be part of this panel with such distinguished panelists. And I have, of course, two questions for both. You describe, both of you describe challenges which they have a lot of in common, as well as Russia has a really huge toolkit and different instruments and different tactics to realize its foreign interference, but also Russia count with enemy within Europe and within the United States. So my first question is for Javier. How has the European Union organized itself to address these challenges which you have mentioned? And what are the plans of the European Union, how to fight this Russian malign influence in Europe?
Well, thank you, Mia, for your question. I'm going to be completely frank about that. We have just adopted the first working document in the committee, and at the very introduction, of this document, it says, and I quote, "Regarding preparation against foreign interference, Europe has long acted as if it had no reason to fear and nothing to protect." Well, I think that this early finding of the committee show that there is a long way to walk till we get a satisfactory set of tools and procedures to deal appropriately with this disinformation strategies. The crucial thing is awareness. I mean, we have to start with the basics, and the basics in this case is awareness. And I know that this sounds like a commonplace, but it is true. I think that we Europeans have been living in a sort of bubble where disinformation was a problem of, let's say, fake news or eccentric conspiracy theories. But after all, I think we thought that there will always be people who believe that Elvis is alive, if only it was true, or people who believe that the earth is flat, or people who believe that, man didn't set foot on the moon. We have seen now that this information has to do with us, and not only with Americans, that we have real interests which are being affected, that this might be a low-intensity conflict with Russia, but Russia has gone beyond the initial aim of restoring its influence in its neighborhood. It's not only about Ukraine. It's not only about trying to roll back the democratic narrative in the Baltic states, and trying to rehabilitate the idea of Soviet Union as an anti-fascist fight. Russia and certainly China, but obviously Russia seems to be the closest threat, has discovered that there is new possibilities of disrupting Western democracies, and we were led to this finding when we saw the Brexit. I think Brexit was the real milestone. That was the turning point in our awareness vis-a-vis the risks of disinformation. That Russia will be putting money, means, and strategy on everything that can affect and can deteriorate the stability of the European Union. So, the European Union has established 3 Stratcom task forces, 3 strategic communication task forces, focused one on Eastern Europe, other on Western Balkans and on the South, and a rapid alert system as a platform to exchange information, analysis, best practices, and as a bridge to cooperate with other countries. It is placed within the European External Service, and it's doing a good job, but it's still far too little to speak of a real European organization of such to counter disinformation. It's been a useful tool, but mainly the organization are still at national level. And we have to take action on that. And I hope that we in the committee will make a meaningful contribution to the kind of measures that we'll have to take. And of course, we have to deal seriously with closest possible cooperation with the United States in this area. It is absolutely crucial because there is a series of threats that we have to be aware of, and we need the analytical, the technological, and I would say the political muscle to deal with these threats.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you for mentioning this possibility of transatlantic cooperation, and I will ask you later about it. But before it, I would like to ask Congressman Rogers, given that Russia put money, means, and strategy in its interference in the American presidential elections in 2016, maybe could we say that in the United States there is a more conscience and awareness of the Russian special operation of political influence? Disinformation is one of instruments of it. And the question is the United States organized for success? I think that last presidential elections of 2020, the EU successfully protect the electoral system, but then we have another problem with cyber attack. So how do the US deal with this Russian malign influence?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Mira, and thanks, Javier. I thought you laid that case out for the European very, very well. One of the things that we did in 2018 as a country is we engaged our National Security Agency in trying to push back on the information out, because they didn't stop, the Russians didn't stop in 2016. They decided to come at us again in 2018. And of course, we believe they try it again heartily in 2020. And so in 2018, there was a bit of a decision change in that before it was, well, if we know what they're doing, at least we can try to turn the lights on it. That just wasn't working. And the fear was if our intelligence community tries to go and push back on that, then we lose sight of what they're doing. This is I think the most common intelligence argument against shutting down certain things, right? That will lose our ability to see what they're doing. Well, what happened in 2018 is we engaged in the game of whack-a-mole. When they sprung up, we whacked them, and then we stood guard to try to whack them again, because they're not going away. Just because we catch them doesn't mean they're going to stop. There's lots of ways, and very quickly can they change avenues to come at us using all of the elements of the internet, the ecosystem of the internet, social media, other things. And so it was more effective in 2018, candidly. Our National Security Agency under General Paul Nakasone was actually really good at that. They got pretty good at it. And good enough that you're not going to get it all, but it slowed it down. And so in 2020, I think they tried this very similar tactics. Now our adversaries get a vote in this. They get to decide if they're going to allow this to happen or not. And the Russians decided, nope, we're not going to allow you to do that to us. We're going to get more creative. And so they got more sophisticated. And this is one of those things that worries me a little bit, is just how sophisticated they are at promoting these things. They actually have a system that you go through now where it's a kind of, we would call it tradecraft in the business. They have a tradecraft now that they can use to apply to an information operation. So finding either forgeries or the fake story, they use fake personas, they create the falsehood, whatever that is. Matter of fact, a great example of that is when we had NATO troops in the Baltics back in what it was 2017, I guess, and they created false letters from the NATO Secretary General on the need for withdrawing from the Baltics, all made up, all promoted through this social media campaign. Once they got onto that, they did that this most recently that the Canadian troops were bringing COVID-19 into the Baltics, all false. but they were trying to sow dissent and chaos and saying, hey, we don't want NATO doing their rotations in the Baltics. Very, very effective. And so what we have to do, this is where I think lashing up. So the US, I think, is getting better at determining information operations when we can catch them into some degree of their success. You want to catch them as early as you can. So we're getting better at that. But it would be far more effective if we could do this jointly with our NATO allies and our partners in Europe about finding these things, and so that we're all pushing back all at the same time, making their lives pretty miserable. You're not going to stop it completely, but what we can do is disrupt their flow of success, if you will, in communicating these messages to communities that are, candidly, I think Javier talked about this on the left and the right, are willing to accept this as truth. I call it affirmation news, right? If it affirms what I already believe, then it must be true, right? And even though it's probably not true in these cases. And so that, and by the way, they've successfully touched these groups already. So they know who they are, they know how to get at them, in both in the right and the left. And they're going to continue to do that. That's why it's important to me to lash up and kind of expand this program at the NSA of getting ahead of this and then sharing it with our domestic agencies and allow them to have a shot at this. I'm a former FBI guy. We're great at forensics, probably not great at preventive in cyber, right? We can tell you that you've had a problem and we can tell you probably who did it through attribution, but we're not great about trying to get ahead of it. We need to change that through the intelligence service of the FBI about make that mission a little bit preventative, as well as the criminal side on the forensic side. So those are changes I'd like to see here, and to know that it wasn't a complete failure here in the United States, but it does highlight the seriousness of this effort. Because again, we've been focused on the Russians. The Chinese are getting better, and we're starting to see that, especially in Europe, their kind of information operation campaigns across Europe. This is a problem we are all going to have to deal with. I'm just not sure we're all, as I said, lashed up as tightly as we should be in trying to push back on this.
Well, Congressman Rogers, I think you make such an important point that I just want to underscore, because I think typically we get sort of wound up, okay, here comes an election, what are we doing about the election? To understand that these campaigns never stop. They are constant, using all tools, the probing, which and I think this is what gets to that structural challenge, because in some ways the parallels that I see is similar to what we did after 9/11, creation of fusion centers, where the information that we are connecting dots of influence of domestic groups that are receptive to the support and the help, it meets their agenda, where you have, and this is where I'm going to bring you right back into that solar winds discussion. So we have a multitude of where cyber penetration of a network is going to now manipulate documents that are part then of a disinformation campaign to erode confidence in democracy. Some of this may be coming out of European groups that are, being they're the proxy, or they're the cover for that. So help us understand, you touched on it earlier. We have to understand this as a chronic campaign, that the most precious thing we have to protect is our democracy. This is where our adversaries see our greatest strength, which is why they're trying to make it our weakness. Talk to us about this connectivity. You struck to it a little bit on the NSA question. And then Javier, I want to turn to you, because I think you're right. The EU is a little behind. Unfortunately, we've gotten whacked so much that we're getting better, not perfect at it. Individual member states are doing this, but they're not sharing necessarily. So Congressman Rogers, let me start with you. Help explore that nexus of all of these, because I think we're going to see a lot of this throughout European elections this year with the fake documents, the local groups. It could be very overwhelming. So help us understand that.
Well, I think that the European impulse and the European framework for develop our work at national level will be absolutely necessary, and that's why we are working on that. Of course, the responsibilities and does have to be distributed, but again, we think that we need European impulse, and we need a clear boost in our cooperation with the United States. Basically, in two areas, in my opinion. First, and I touch upon what Mike has said, the increasing sophistication and the increasing sophistication of tactics and the technological component of disinformation. We are seeing that these more targeted attacks, and that involves the enormous problem of cybersecurity, which is a basic component of disinformation, particularly if you want to make it more sophisticated, more targeted. And on the other hand, I think that we Europeans, we have to talk seriously about China with the United States. I think that should be a common item in our agenda. I know that there can be different views on different aspects, but as far as security is concerned, I think that we have to be very frank in talking with the United States about China.
Congressman Rogers, and I want to slip one question in. We're getting a lot of wonderful audience questions, and I'm trying to incorporate those into our conversations. Responsibility of technology companies and platforms in this fight. This is a multi-stakeholder approach. I think we've done a better job of bringing the private sector into this, but our audience is very keen to also understand companies' roles in this fight.
Yeah, well, listen, again, I come at it from my old FBI days, but if you provide burglary tools to someone and they use those tools to commit burglary, guess what? You're a part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. And so I argue they do have a role. We have to be careful about censorship because it's very easy to get that wrong. I mean, and we have to be absolutely vigilant on this. But they do have to at least cooperate with government agencies that are trying to figure out who are these bad actors, right? And they're not trying to say that you can't have a disagreement. I think, matter of fact, I think great democracies have just pretty aggressive disagreements. That's okay. That's good, right? The old African proverb that a kite only rises against the wind, right? If you want democracy to go, we got to hear all sides of that argument. Yeah, but we also have to know that people are using those platforms to try to do bad things to the United States. And so, yes, they have a role in this. One thing I didn't mention on that I think will change this equation about getting it together, I think both to Heather and Mira's question, was the new cyber director that we have at the White House. And I have to tell you, I opposed this when it first came out when I was chairman of the committee. And my good friend, James Langevin, he and I had really healthy debates on this. He's a wonderful guy, probably one of the smartest cyber guys in Congress still today. And I just kept thinking, the administration's going to get it right. Every administration says they're going to get it right. And what I found is with Bush to Obama to Trump, none of the three got it right, because it was really hard to corral these big personalities that look at cyber. And I don't mean people personalities, I mean agency personalities. The NSA, big personality. DOD, you had, the FBI, our agency, they're all kind of looking at their equities. We didn't have anyone sitting on top of them kind of clunking heads saying, I got all that, but we have a problem here. And so that, I think, is going to be a really important step for the United States. And Ann Neuberger, who is from the NSA, I've worked with her for years, really extremely talented. I have good faith and confidence that she's going to be able to put them in a room and work through this very hard problem. And so think of that we're trying to get our act together in the United States, and then you have Europe, and they have the same kind of problems, but they're a few years behind us trying to figure out these problems. It just tells you how much work we have to do. So we're going to have to get our own act together on a collective defense. And then what would be great is to try to bring our allies along with us on this collective defense idea, where we're all kind of looking at the problem the same way, and we all have the ability to push back in almost the same way with capability. It's not going to be exactly the same, but without all of that coordination, they're going to win. And we don't want to lose the ability for people to have differences of opinion, even ones that we passionately disagree with on social media platforms. The trick is, can you attribute it to, and this is the big part, can you attribute it to foreign actors doing bad things? I think together we'll be able to do this better. It shouldn't probably be just the companies themselves. That doesn't sound like a recipe for a win for me, but their decision based on information that comes from intelligence agencies could be a powerful combination to get it right and still allow people to disagree.
And Mira, sorry, please go ahead. Go ahead, Javier.
No, I just think that Mike got the difficult question, that of what to do with platforms and social media, and he's entirely right. If we want to fight for democracy, we have to uphold the basic democratic principles. That would be the defeat of democracy if we introduce a sort of censorship. But I think there's a lot to do in terms of collaboration between private sector, private media, and law enforcement and intelligence services. And that is something that does not need to be seen with suspect, but should be reassuring for the population. And at the same time, it is true that in the United States and Europe, we have a different approach in legal terms. You are very much based on the First Amendment and the judicial control, while we in Europe try to have a more regulatory approach as far as freedom of speech is concerned. But I think that is not a main obstacle. Mike has told a couple of words that I think are crucial: attribution, exposure, naming. We have to be aware, and that's an important legal distinction that we have to make, that most of the content that is fed into social media and can be considered as disinformation is not itself illegal as such. It can be harmful, disruptive, you name it, but it's not illegal in itself. So how can we push them back? By good reporting, by good information, by exposure of their actors, by attribution. And I think that the European Union has been quite reassuring in naming very clearly and officially China, Russia, and Iran as the main sources of this information. That is something that other member states have been reluctant to take that step, because it would think that that would be counterproductive in diplomatic terms. Now we know where the source of this information is, and these kind of destabilizing strategies, and I think that we should walk this path that Mike has referred to.
Absolutely, thank you, Mira. I just want to jump in here because I know probably 50% of the questions that we're getting from our fantastic audience is teeing up your question, which is transatlantically, how do we make this work? So let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, both of you mentioned that we have to improve transatlantic cooperation on these issues. Also, the President Biden's plan to revitalize NATO appeared to include giving the alliance a greater role in technological and industrial innovation. Also, the NATO 2030 report calls for a joint transatlantic effort in the field of emerging technologies, in fighting the malign influences of foreign actors. So how can the transatlantic relationship work together on this common challenge? I think that we share values without any doubts. We don't share always interests, but in this situation, in this context, I think that have to prevail our common idea of liberal democracy, of our values, and how we can fight against the people, states, organization which would like to harm it. So maybe I will start now with Mike. First, how we can improve transatlantic relationship in these issues. We have to improve it anyway after Trump administration, but just focus on now on these issues.
Yeah, well, obviously re-engaging with our allies is going to be an important effort here in the next couple of years, and an important one. We have big, grand world challenges, and you can't do this by taking friends off the table. It just doesn't work very well. I would argue we need to get small before we get big. And here's what I mean by that. We have tried this, and I tried it when I was in Congress. You know, you want to solve the big problem, and we want to do a piece of legislation that solves the whole big problem, and then we can go on and move to something else. And what happens is we never quite get there. And so my argument, here's the relationship that we know works, that we have really tight both intelligence and other relationships, and that's with NATO and our NATO partners. So, and to your point, Mira, sometimes our economic interests, European economic interests and US economic interests are together mostly, but there are occasions when they are not. And so what we do know is that in all cases with NATO, our security alliances are the same. And so if we can focus our efforts on stopping information operations that we know are designed to disrupt democracy, all right, we're all going to agree on that. I think the Europeans believe that. Certainly we believe that. Even our extended allies, even the Pacific, our Australian friends, and even countries who are emerging or trying to get to democracy, we ought to help them, bring them along. But the one place is NATO. And so I would start there with really aggressive lashing up on information operations that we know are targeted at disrupting democracy. I think we can do that. We're going to learn from the Europeans for sure. I think they'll learn from us for sure. And then we can come up with standards that we can all believe in pushing back and going after these information operations. And I would solely focus on that up front. We have some cyber efforts. We have other things. Great. Those are all great. Conversations about how you get, the world of cyber to all get along with a big worldly group hug. Not going to happen because China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran have free reign to do bad things. They're not going to give that up. And so that's a longer term problem. This lashing up today is a short term. So if I were king for a day, I would do exactly that. I would mash us up at NATO. And then, by the way, once we're through that, it's easier to push into other problems like Chinese information operations that are a little more subtle than the Russians. Right? They want you to believe that their form of government is better than your form of government. This is the old Soviet style, right? Our form of government was better than your form of government. We're going to show you why. We're going to engage in information operations to do that. By the way, this has been going on for, well, as long as we've all been countries, we've had information operations, but not like this. And so I think that this allows us to get this piece right. This is the clear and present danger. Then let's push back on this broader Chinese information operation that's designed to degrade people's belief, faith, and confidence in democracies. And I think if we do it that way from a completely a national security strategic effort, I think we'll find a lot more common ground. If we try to expand on economics, we'll get all mucked up, and we'll be talking about this 4 years from now when we have another event into either US or European elections.
Javier, you have 2 minutes.
I have just 2 minutes. Well,
yeah, I mean, 1.5 maybe better.
Well,
sorry.
It's going to be very simple for me. I am an old-fashioned Atlanticist, so yes. I think that this is a good issue to deal with in NATO, and I think that this practical step-by-step approach that Mike has described would be a good starting point. We have to be very ambitious because the challenges ahead are really frightening in some sense. And I think cybersecurity is going to become an even more pressing issue, very much linked to disinformation and interference strategies. But I think that the Europeans and Americans know how to work together. So we need the will to work together again. Now we have the threat of Soviet tanks crossing Poland and entering into Germany. Hopefully not, but we have another kind of threat, and probably in the long term could be exactly as concerning as old threats that we face successfully, both Americans and Europeans united.
Well, this conversation has been so good. I'm going to squeeze one more question in because we've had a great question from our audience. It's about how do you impose true costs for these constant cyber attacks and interference in the most valuable thing we have, which is our democracy. very briefly, how would you both propose to your respective governments and institutions, what cost would you impose on adversaries that interfere in democratic processes? Congressman Rogers, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, and Javier mentioned this earlier, naming and shaming, really important, and make sure that transparency kills, that bright sunlight kills a lot of bad things. And we ought to engage in that robustly. And in the past, we've tried not to do that because we didn't, for a whole host of reasons. I argue that that day has come and gone. We need to name and shame. The other piece is have a common agreement on what offensive measures or disruptions that we can cause some cost to them overseas in their home countries. And I'm not talking about turning out the lights and causing things that could cause people to die. That certainly is another standard, but we do need to impose some costs for their intelligence agencies having free rein to do this, and then have a unified response. Imagine if we got together in Europe and America and even our Pacific Rim allies and said, guess what, we're going to start to have economic costs to your activities to try to disrupt democracy. If we added all of those up, I think that cost would be pretty significant. And it has to be ongoing and it has to be real and they have to feel the impacts of it. If we don't do that, I fear that they're just going to continue to do exactly what they do. Hardly any cost at all.
Javier.
I think they have to be aware that we know what they're doing, and we need to start to devise measures that can range from naming and shaming to effective sanctions and have an impact on the very sensitive sectors, economic sectors, and we should contemplate that. We should contemplate that.
Well, thank you so much. And Javier, I have to say, I love that old-fashioned transatlanticist. One of the audience questions, which I thought, we have to bring a new generation into this, a young generation that understands the value of the transatlantic relationship. We mentioned NATO as just the core task of protecting our democracy and our way of life. So we have a big responsibility to help the next generation of leaders think about these issues in the same light. This has been a tremendous conversation, and it tells me this is one of the key areas that the transatlantic relationship must get right. We have some very significant elections in Europe. I'm thinking about the German parliament elections this fall, which is a big focus, and we know that there was Russian intervention previously, hacking into the Bundestag, CDU. We know the French presidential elections are coming up in 2022, so some big targets there. The campaign never ends. Absolutely. But we're so grateful that we have some of the most thoughtful people working on these issues and supporting our leaders and how they think through them. Again, thank you so much, Javier, Mike Rogers, our dear colleague, Mira Milosevich, who's just been a fantastic part of our CSIS family. And we thank our audience for joining us. Stay tuned for additional programs. CSIS is very focused on protecting democratic processes from threat, and we'll continue to do this research, and we hope you'll continue to tune in. So with that, have a fantastic weekend, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Javier.
It's been all my pleasure. Thanks, Mike. Glad to see you. Thanks, Heather.
Adios.
Adios.